Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I wanted to talk about winter book recommendations. It's currently winter time, and here in Toronto we've been having some crazy weather. Just really cold. We've had an Arctic blast. I think a lot of people have been experiencing that right now, and it's been freezing. So it made me think about all the books that remind me of winter, or I would highly recommend to read in the winter time, all for various different reasons. And so I put a list of 10 books together. So I'm going to talk about them today, and hopefully you guys will come out with a couple of books that you're going to add to your TBR to enjoy this winter time. The first book on my list I actually just finished, and I immediately knew that this would be a recommendation I would give to people, especially during the winter time, and that is The Door by Magda Schapel. This book is magnificent. A short yet such an impactful and compelling story. You're following Magda. It was very fascinating for me to have the main character and the author have the same first name, and Magda in the book is also an author. I don't know if that was on purpose. You're following along Magda, who is a author as well as a wife, and she is on the hunt to hire a housekeeper because she just cannot keep up with the work at home. So she hires a woman named Emerence, who is well known in their community to be like the most strongest and hardworking woman you will ever meet, but a very unique woman. And you're following along, honestly, decades of their relationship together as they cross paths and work together, where there are two people that are from two totally different economic statuses. They are from different upbringings. They are from different classes in society. They have different educational backgrounds, and this story and the way that their lives interweave together is so fascinating and so gripping. And there's a mystery that is woven throughout the story that you find out about in chapter 1. And it is just such an amazing book. I underlined so many different passages in this story. I was obsessed, and I'm dumbfounded when I think about this book. I initially gave it a 4.5 stars. I think I might be bumping it up to a 5 stars because it's just that good. So highly recommend reading this in the winter. There are winter settings in this book, but overall just the themes and this book, like, it just feels so cold to me. I don't know how else to describe it. It just feels like a book you have to read in the winter time. The next book I have here, and the second and only physical book I actually have on hand, is Little Women. And as you can see, I'm actually currently doing a reread of Little Women. And although I would highly recommend reading this in December because the beginning of this book is set kind of around Christmas time, it's still such a warm and cozy book that I would just recommend reading it during the wintertime period. So if you don't know what Little Women is about, you're following along 4 sisters during the 1800s Civil War, and they're all pretty young. They're like in their teens or younger, and you're just following along as they are at home with their mother, as their dad is at war, and you follow along their life. And there's just such beautiful meaning behind this book. There's topics and lessons about gratitude, family, relationships, love, and just appreciation for what you have. It's such a sweet novel, and I just adore this family. I have yet to watch any of the film adaptations for Little Women, and I am so excited to watch them after I read or reread this book. But yeah, I just love it. It's so easy to read too. It is, I think, technically a middle grade, but it's just such a sweet book, and I can only really describe this as like a warm hug. Very opposite from The Door, but I would highly recommend reading these both during the winter time. Now, if you have been a subscriber of mine, You will know I cannot do a recommendation video, especially for wintertime, without bringing up Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This book has my heart. This series has my heart. It is most likely my favorite series of all time. So Beartown is about a small town called Beartown where there's not much going on other than hockey. Everyone's obsessed with hockey. Hockey kind of runs everything in this town, and it has quite a bit of corruption along the way. There is a hockey team in Beartown. They're very successful, very good, and this season they are kind of set to be the winners in their region, but a tragedy, violent act, whatever you want to call it, happens and it affects everything. And so you're following along that story, you're following along certain different characters' POVs. Some of them are like coaches, some of them are the students, some of them are the hockey players, and the family's affected. It's definitely a wintry book. It is also just a book that deals with heavy topics, I feel like, in a really great way. It is very compelling and easy to read, and it is a book that kind of captures you in very quickly, and you just want to sit and finish it. It is just such a fantastic book. I think Frederick Bachman in general is such a fantastic author, one of my favorite authors of all time, and I highly, highly recommend this series, especially in the wintertime. The next book on my list is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is such an iconic book. It's definitely a book to read in the wintertime. You're following along a older woman named Janina who lives in a remote Polish village, and it's set in the wintertime where not many of them are currently living there, and her neighbor winds up dead. And so she kind of gets interested in finding out what happens and really annoys the officers because they are kind of trying to rule it like an accident, and she's saying it's not an accident, that it's a murder. And then after that, more people wind up dead, and nobody is listening to Janina's theories as to what happened. And so you're kind of just following along that, but there are twists and turns and crazy things and mind-bending things that happen that this book is so much fun to read. And although I didn't love Janina as a character, I do think this book is so enthralling and it captures you in, and it's just such a another cold book for me. It just felt so cold. The next book, again, will come to no one's surprise, and that is The Simple Wild by Kay Tucker. This series is probably my favorite romance series of all time. You're following along a girl in her 20s named Kala. She lives in Toronto with her mother, and then she finds out that her estranged father, who lives in Alaska, is not doing so good and is sick. So she decides to go and visit Alaska to visit her father, and along the way meets Jonah, a man that doesn't get along with her right away. She meets the people in her father's town, and she kind of comes across, I guess, this type of life and this community that possibly is what she is missing in life. And it's just such a wonderful story about family and grief and finding oneself. The writing is so easy to digest and so easy to become obsessed with. I loved the characters, I loved the romance in this series, and it's just so good. I laughed, I cried, I felt all the feels while reading this book, and I devoured the entire series within a week. I think with the Alaskan setting that it just feels so wintry to me. I also read it in February, so it was very cold at that time as well. I just adored it, and I would highly recommend it. The next book I would recommend to read in the wintertime is Rue by Kim Thuy, which I read this book 3 years ago now, and I initially gave it 3 stars, but it is a story that has been on the back of my mind and comes up every once in a while. I feel like I might need to reread it because of the way that it has stayed with me. It doesn't really correlate to my average 3-star other books, but this book is a very, very short novel. I guess you could even call it a narrative, just the way that it is written. It's very unique. And it is about a young girl who immigrates from Vietnam to Canada and what happens along the way, the heartbreak of leaving what everything that you know to go somewhere new, the hardship of immigration and adapting to a new normal, the culture that you can feel that is lost when you immigrate somewhere new, and just all the complexities of that, as well as the good and the love that comes with it. There were parts of it that I felt very relatable, especially as my parents immigrated from Poland to Canada, so I know that kind of hardship very closely because I've seen it, and I still see it. And then there were other parts of the story that I felt disconnected to, and it could be that this book was initially written in French to English, and I feel like French people can be harsh with the words sometimes, and that doesn't translate well to English, where, I don't know, sometimes we use such flowery language when French are like so to the point. But it could just be me and the way that I was interpreting the words. But this story just really left a mark for me. I read this during the winter time, and that's why I feel like I associate it to winter. I don't know if I were to reread it again in the summertime that I would recommend it in the summer, but it just felt wintry to me. I would say it's easy to follow. I wouldn't say it's an easy book to read, just because some of the things are very sad that she talks about in this book, and very real. The next book I would recommend is again another book that I didn't really rate super high, but I feel like is the perfect book for winter, and that is The Shining by Stephen King. If you have not yet read this book, I would recommend to read it in the wintertime if you're into thrillers or Stephen King. Or if you've read the or not read the movie, or if you've watched the movie, I would still recommend reading it because they are quite different. I watched the movie after I read the book. I know, shocker, I never watched The Shining before, but yeah, they are very different. I think I might like the movie more just because it was faster to me. The Shining, the book, felt like it dragged on a little bit during the middle, but I still felt it was very fascinating to read and a compelling story. If you don't know what The Shining is about, it is about a man named Jack Torrance who takes a off-season winter job at a hotel to kind of be the caretaker while they have no people staying there. Very cold, very harsh climate. He brings his wife and his child to stay with him, and he's seeing it as like a really easy winter job to do. But soon after they arrive, some kind of cryptic, sinister, weird things start happening, and specifically their son Danny is the one that is noticing things. I'm just gonna leave it there. There is a lot more to that story, but I'm gonna keep it as simple and as non-spoilery as I can. A great winter read. Fun, creepy, a little unrealistic and crazy at times, but it was a good book. I think I was just a little bit disappointed because of the hype that was surrounded around this book. I'm also not a specific thriller lover. I find it is hard to find a thriller that I love, but a lot of them I like, and that is what is the case here with The Shining. The next book I would recommend is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Oh my god, this book is so warm, cozy. It is such a heartwarming book to read, and I feel like that is sometimes what you need in the wintertime to kind of keep you going during those dark, dark moments. But this book, you're following along a witch named Mika Moon, and she lives in a society where being a witch is, I don't know if you would say is banned, but she's supposed to be very under the radar, not noticeable. It's kind of funny because then she creates like a social media presence of pretending to be a witch, but she is actually a witch. And she gets contacted one day by a man asking her to come and teach these 3 witch orphan children how to control their magic in this place called the Nowhere House. I think it's the Nowhere House. Yeah. And so she takes up the offer and she goes, and you're following along this journey of this found family, these three children that are so cute and different and adorable in their own ways, as well as Mika kind of finding herself and her magic again, like the beauty of it. And then there's also a love story interweaved through. Oh, it was just so beautiful. I love this book. I find it so warm and so cozy, and I would definitely recommend reading it in the wintertime. The next book I would recommend reading in the wintertime is The Fake Out by Stephanie Archer. This is a hockey romance. It's technically a second book in a series, but honestly, I would probably not recommend Behind the Net, which is the first book in the series. Didn't love that one, but I really loved The Fake Out. So The Fake Out, you're following along Hazel, who is a physio for the Vancouver Storm team, I think is what they call them. And what ends up happening is that her ex joins the team and kind of starts, I wouldn't say torturing her, but kind of. And so she ends up fake dating his rival, who is the captain of the team, Rory. And there's backstory to Rory and Hazel. They knew each other in high school. She tutored him. It's a whole thing. They aren't, well, she isn't on the best terms with him and thinks he's kind of arrogant, but he is obsessed with her. And so you're following along them fake dating. And it just was such a cute, like, romance. I feel like I had no issues with it, which is typically hard to find in romances. There's always usually 1 to 2 things that I would like to change about the story, but this one I really did not have anything that really annoyed me. I loved it. It was a wonderful hockey romance, and again, I feel like in the wintertime you just want something warm and cozy sometimes to make you feel better, and romance is my go-to, and this just fits because it's like a hockey romance. So another wonderful book to read in the wintertime. And then last but certainly not least, I would recommend The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. If you have not read this already, I feel like it had such a surge of popularity come and go throughout the past year since it came out. But this is a book I read when it came out, and I was obsessed with it and still think about it to this day. Definitely warrants another read through of it because it was just so good. But you're following along Addie LaRue, who, and you have kind of like 2 different timelines. The first timeline is like in the 1700s, where she's in a bad situation and she makes a deal with the devil, basically, to become immortal. But what comes with being immortal is that no one will ever remember who she is. And then the second timeline is in the 21st century, where she comes across a man named Henry who remembers her. And it's the first time in centuries that she has come across someone who remembered her. And that's all I'm going to leave you with. It is such a fantastical, gripping story where you just want to know what's going to end up happening with their story, with Addie, and there's so many twists along the way. Some people don't like the ending. I don't know. I love it. I don't love it. It's just this book. It like gets my heart pounding because I just remember reading it and like constantly flipping pages, like reading it so quickly because I was just so enraptured by the story and I just wanted to know what happened to it, like what's gonna happen, and it was just so good. So good. I fell in love with the characters. I just adored this book. Those were all 10 books that I would recommend to read during the wintertime. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what are your winter recommendations, because I'm always looking for more cozy books to read during the wintertime, especially because winter lasts here for like 6 months. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all very soon. Bye!